Something changed, and not in a way that was loud or noticeable to others. It didn't come with a breakdown or a breakdown post. It didn't scream for attention. It arrived like a soft sigh inside your bones, a quiet pause between routines that used to define you. You woke up one morning, and the world felt distant, like someone had turned down the volume on reality and no one else noticed. You walked through the day, not numb, not sad, but disconnected, not from life, but from a version of it that never truly fit you. You weren't broken. You weren't spiraling. You were just no longer in resonance with the identity you had worn for so long. It's easy to miss this shift if you're still measuring your worth by how on you can be. If you're still counting the messages you haven't answered, the events you've skipped, the energy you haven't faked. You tell yourself you're slipping, failing, disappearing. But what's really happening is this. You're finally letting go of a frequency that was never yours to begin with. The version of you that was built to survive, to fit in, to be palatable, that version has started to dissolve. And what's left is not a collapse. It's a return, a slow, sacred return to the self beneath all performance. You stop reaching for the phone the moment you wake up, not because you don't care, but because you can no longer participate in the noise. You stop explaining your choices to people who never tried to understand you anyway. You stop dressing your emotions up to make them easier for others to consume. You stop responding out of obligation. You stop reacting just to stay relevant. And instead, you begin to notice the world in a new way, not as something you need to keep up with, but something you're finally choosing to observe from stillness. This isn't apathy. It's awareness. You're not pulling away from people because you don't love them. You're pulling away from the energy dynamics that kept your nervous system in a loop of pretending. You're not avoiding conversations because you have nothing to say. You're waiting until your words are true. You're not shutting down. You're becoming honest. And in that honesty, things begin to unravel. Not dramatically, but with quiet precision. You cancel plans without guilt. You choose silence over explanation. You walk slower. You breathe deeper. You start listening to your body, not your calendar. And yes, the world may interpret this as weakness, but that's only because it doesn't yet understand the power of resting in your own signal. You're not meant to keep up with everything. You're meant to come back to coherence. The old identity is still trying to call you back. It whispers things like, you're falling behind. You're not being productive. People will forget you. But those voices are echoes from a version of you that believed validation was a prerequisite for existence. And now that you've stepped away from that noise, even if only slightly, you're beginning to feel the subtle truth that was always there beneath the surface. You don't have to perform peace to deserve rest. This moment, this strange, soft withdrawal, it's not a phase. It's not a failure. It's not something to fix. It's the beginning of a deeper rhythm, a slower truth, a realignment with a life that doesn't require distortion. And even if you can't name what's happening, your body knows. Your field knows. Your soul knows. You're not disappearing. You're just remembering how to exist without pretending. When you first withdraw from the noise, you expect a kind of relief, a soft exhale, a sense of peace. And for a while, you get it. But then the space grows larger. And what you thought would be calm starts to feel blank, hollow, weightless in a way that's not liberating, but unsettling. You find yourself sitting in your room longer than usual. You begin to move slower, not because you're tired, but because your body refuses to perform at the pace it once did. You're not used to this kind of pause, not in a world that demands urgency at every turn. You try to label it. Is this depression? Burnout? A spiritual lull? But none of those words feel honest. This isn't collapse. This is clarity, just in a form that doesn't give you direction yet. You're used to healing meaning feeling better, but now you realize healing often means feeling deeply, rawly, without the filters. All the emotions you bypassed in your productivity, all the grief you stored behind your smile, all the questions you silenced with busyness, they come up now, not to punish you, but to liberate you. This is the detox, not of the body, but of the self. The version of you that carried everything silently is now putting it down. And when you put something down, your hands shake, not because you're weak, but because you're not used to being unburdened. You don't know what to do with the space you've created, but you're not supposed to know. You're supposed to wait, not passively, but reverently. It is here, in this strange space between identities, that you begin to meet your real self, the one you didn't have time for when you were too busy becoming someone the world could understand. You realize how many decisions you made from urgency, how often you agreed to things just to avoid disappointing others, how long you've performed a personality that was digestible but never whole. Now that you've stopped, there's no one left to applaud, and you realize how much of your energy came from applause. You stop measuring your worth by your output. You stop answering questions that weren't asked by your soul. You start listening to the silence, and something inside of it begins to respond. Not with words, but with frequency. You don't get answers. You get resonance. You start feeling drawn to different books, different music, different people. Not because you decided to change, but because your field shifted, and now you're tuning into a different signal. And with that comes confusion, because your mind is still attached to the old system, still trying to find logic in a space built on energy. It tells you to make a plan, to push forward, to go back to what's familiar. But your body resists, not out of fear, but out of integrity. You can't force the new timeline with the language of the old one. You can't build a soul-based life with tools designed for survival. This is the initiation of your nervous system, a recalibration that looks like fatigue, a healing that feels like disinterest, a rebirth that doesn't begin with joy, but with detachment. Because before you can remember who you are, you must forget who you were told to be. And this forgetting is sacred. So if you feel unclear, stay still. If you feel empty, breathe into it. If you feel like the world has forgotten you, it's because you're no longer broadcasting on its frequency. This isn't exile, it's emergence. And the life that fits your truth is being built in the background right now at the speed of honesty. There comes a moment in this transition where nothing works. Not the routines you used to rely on, not the goals that once lit a fire in you, not even the practices that once brought you peace. You try to meditate and your mind drifts. You try to journal and nothing comes. You make a to-do list and your body simply won't move. You're not lazy. You're not undisciplined. You're simply no longer able to run on the fuel that once sustained a version of you that no longer exists. It's a strange kind of paralysis, not of the body, but of the will. You still care. You still want to grow. But there's a deep refusal rising from within, not conscious, but cellular, as if your entire being is saying, I will no longer pour energy into what isn't true. And that shift is not conceptual, it's physiological. Your nervous system is rejecting the old field. Your muscles are refusing to fake urgency. Your voice hesitates before speaking just to fill silence. Your spirit will not push just to be seen. And so you stall, not in life, but in the narrative you used to follow. The goals no longer excite you. The metrics no longer define you. The validation no longer feeds you. It's not because you're failing. It's because your frequency is evolving. And the systems you once thrived in cannot decode the new signal you're carrying. They still ask you to produce, to package yourself, to perform alignment. But your new self doesn't care about appearance. It cares about integrity. It's no longer asking, what should I do? It's asking, what am I still doing out of distortion? That question begins to echo everywhere. In your work, in your relationships, in your language. You start noticing the subtle ways you use to contort yourself. The agreements you made without awareness, the habits you maintained just to keep the illusion of momentum alive. And suddenly, those patterns begin to crumble. Not because you're trying to change, but because you can't pretend anymore. Even your dreams start to shift. What once felt like ambition now feels like performance. The timelines you used to visualize no longer feel vibrant. They feel inherited, like someone else's definition of freedom dressed in your voice. This is not emptiness. This is the disconnection from the broadcast. You're unplugging from a grid that once rewarded your suppression. You're dropping out of a game that measured success by how well you abandoned yourself. And of course, it feels strange. Of course, it feels disorienting. Because you've spent years responding to a rhythm that was never set by your soul. And now, you're listening for a beat that hasn't fully landed yet. The silence is not absence. It's a signal waiting to emerge. This stage is the hardest to explain to others because there's nothing to show. No big change, No dramatic story, just a steady unraveling, a soft refusal, a sacred fatigue, a knowing that you cannot continue the way things were, even if you don't yet know what comes next. And that's the point. Because this in between, this floating, untethered space, is not the void. It's the womb of your next frequency, a place where your field is recalibrating to a deeper, more honest resonance. But to receive that, you must allow yourself to feel nothing. Not out of failure, but out of faith. Because the most profound upgrades don't feel like triumph. They feel like quiet disconnection from the lie. You're not falling apart. You're falling out of sync with distortion, and that is the highest alignment you can choose. There's a moment, often subtle, often quiet, when you realize you've been living inside a storyline that someone else wrote. Not maliciously, not with force, but through culture, through conditioning, through the silent agreements you made just to belong. And when you begin to exit that narrative, the world doesn't shift around you. You shift within it. Familiar spaces start to feel strange. Conversations sound like scripts. Relationships reveal the roles you've been playing. And you begin to see, with a clarity you can't unsee, just how many layers of yourself were shaped by survival, not by truth. The story you inherited may have served you. It may have kept you safe. It may have given you identity, structure, even love. But now your body no longer wants to act out that role. Not because it's weak, but because it's done. The performance is over. And in its place, there is not yet a new script. Just space, stillness, the soft hum of your own signal, finally getting stronger than the noise. This space can feel like exile. You look around and everything continues as before. The world keeps spinning, people keep talking, timelines keep churning. But inside, you've stopped. Not out of defeat, but out of discernment. You're no longer willing to move just because movement is expected. You're no longer interested in speaking what isn't aligned. You're no longer available for roles that mute your authenticity. And because of that, people start to notice. They say, you've changed. They say you're distant. They say you're hard to read. But what they're really noticing is your signal detaching from the shared illusion. You're not trying to be mysterious. You're trying to be honest. And honesty, when spoken from a field that no longer plays the same game, feels like silence to those still inside it. This is the part of the journey no one prepares you for. The loneliness of coherence, the ache of walking away from comfort, the weight of choosing resonance over routine. You start grieving things you never knew you were allowed to grieve. The dreams you inherited from someone else's fear, the identities that never truly fit, the versions of you that were loved for being useful, not real. This grief is sacred because it clears the path for emergence, not a new identity, but a remembered one. One that was never about proving, performing, or pleasing. One that simply is. And as this deeper version of you begins to rise, it doesn't announce itself with clarity. It emerges with contradiction. You feel strong and uncertain, quiet and alert, disconnected from the old but not yet fully rooted in the new. That's not confusion, that's recalibration. Because you're not meant to know who you are in words anymore. You're meant to feel it in frequency. And that frequency doesn't rush, it doesn't demand, it waits, it stabilizes, it deepens. This is not about becoming. This is about being. And the space you're in now, this in-between, this not quite anything, is not a gap. It's a portal, a threshold between timelines, between truths, between realities. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're not lost. You're simply outside the story. And from here, you'll finally write your own. At first, it comes in moments so small, you almost miss them. A breath that doesn't carry weight. A glance in the mirror that feels soft instead of analytical. A laugh that isn't filtered through performance. It's subtle, like hearing your own voice for the first time after years of echo. You pause and you realize the numbness is thinning. The fog is lifting. The field is shifting again, not with force, but with invitation. This is not the same as before. You're not returning to some past version of yourself. You're not snapping out of it. What's returning is resonance. Not from effort, but from permission. Because you finally stopped trying to fix yourself back into a structure that was never meant to hold your truth. And now, that truth is moving, not loudly, but unmistakably, back into form. You may still feel uncertain. You may not have answers. You may still float between days without clarity. But there's something anchoring now. Something you don't need to explain because it's not conceptual, it's vibrational. You're beginning to act from instinct again, not reaction. You're speaking from your field, not from fear. You're deciding without debating yourself into paralysis. It's not confidence exactly, it's coherence. Your inner world is syncing with your external choices, not always perfectly, but consistently enough that your body no longer braces for contradiction. And with that shift comes new discomfort, the discomfort of peace, of stillness that isn't hollow, of joy that isn't a reward, but a baseline. It feels strange at first, foreign, even boring, because you've been conditioned to feel only through friction, to trust intensity over intimacy. But now, your nervous system is learning a new rhythm, one that doesn't spike, but sustains, one that doesn't collapse after pleasure, but builds on it. And slowly, you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" You stop searching for what's missing. You stop analyzing your every silence as avoidance. Because you begin to trust that stillness doesn't always need a story. Sometimes it's just space. And in that space, creation begins, not from pressure, but from presence. You may begin to create again, but not for validation. You may begin to speak again, but not to be heard. You may begin to move again, but not to be productive. You're no longer broadcasting the illusion of alignment. You're embodying the quiet truth of it. And the world will feel that shift, even if they don't understand it, even if they can't name it. They will sense the difference, not in your words, but in your energy. Because now you are not leaking frequency, you are living it. You'll begin to attract experiences not from force, but from field. Not because you've figured it all out, but because you're finally real. And what is real will always find you. This is not a conclusion. This is an opening, a threshold into the version of you that was never missing, only waiting. Not behind the noise, not beneath the fear, but beyond the old script. Now, you're not here to prove anything. You're here to remember what it means to live in frequency. Fully, honestly, unapologetically. Welcome back.